Well, this isn't exactly what I wanted to look like while I was starting this video, but I want to start this book and it's nighttime and I don't want to like try to look nice to go to bed, you know? But this is a casual video. We're just hanging out. We could be comfortable with each other, right? Hi, my name is Sarah Freshly and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. So today I'm going to be starting The Green Mile by Stephen King. I typically try to read one Stephen King novel a year, and I've been wanting to do the ones that have been translated into movies that are classics so that I can then go and watch those, because obviously I want to read the books first. So last year I did The Shining and I watched that movie. I didn't film a video or anything for it, I just did it. But this year I wanted to film the process of it, and I recently did a video of this style for Gone Girl where I like just talk about everything and there's just full spoilers and update throughout reading the book. So I wanted to do that again. And I feel like The Green Mile is probably a good one because I'm assuming that a lot of people have read it, but also this might be one of those weird things where like the movie's a classic, but not a lot of people have read the book. I don't really know. Like The Shining, of course a lot of people read the book. Carrie, of course a lot of people have read the book. But like The Green Mile, I never hear people talking about the book version of this. So as I said, this is going to be a full spoiler video. I'm going to be talking about anything and everything in this book. So if that's not something that you're looking for, this is probably not the video for you. Initial thoughts going into it, I know absolutely nothing except that there's an electric chair in it. I assume death row is a part of this. Besides that, I know nothing. So let's get started. Hi, it's future Sarah here, and I realized that I never really explained how I ended up doing this video, because in the past, like for the Gone Girl video that I mentioned here, I did an update every however many pages that it took for something big to happen or for it to feel like I had enough to update on. And for this one, I ended up deciding to do it a little bit differently because after reading the introduction to the book, I realized that this book was originally published in installments. So this was split into 6 installments, and I believe each installment was sold, and so people could buy it one week, could buy like installment 1, and then the next week they could buy installment 2, and so on. And so I thought it would be fun to read it because it's still published in this way, like it's still split into the 6 installments. It hasn't been readapted to this format, so I thought that it could be fun to read it the same way that those people that read it when it was initially published that had to wait a week between each installment, I thought it'd be fun to read it that way. And so that's what I did. So basically I did it so that every Wednesday I was like able to read the new installment of the book. And then that's also how this video is broken down, like the timestamps are by installment. So I think that's all the information you need to know. I just didn't explain it at all when I was recording for some reason. So I thought I'd help you out a little bit. All right. So on to installment 1. So this first installment, basically it kind of sets the stage where we're at in the prison and the different characters, the different people that work there. It took me a little bit to get used to their names, and still a lot of them blend together. Basically, if they're not the main character or the most annoying character, which is Percy, who the main character complains about all the time, then they kind of just blend together into like the same vague other person that also works here. So we get the stage kind of set, and we also meet John Coffey, who is the main character, I guess, in this story. Like there is the protagonist, the person whose eyes we're seeing this story, but the guy that's actually on death row for a crime and is supposed to die is John Coffey. So he is convicted of killing 2 girls, hence the name of this installment. And he's a very large man. I'm picturing Shaq when they talk about him. Although like height-wise, like I know people taller than him and they talk about him like he is a giant. Yeah, okay, I'm imagining Shaq, he's not even as tall as Shaq. Like that, of course that's tall, that's definitely tall, but like they need to calm down about the height of this person. So because of his appearance, he's got like quite a presence about him. However, he's got like the nicest demeanor. Like he's very soft-spoken and gentle seeming, at least the little bit of him that we've seen so far. And we also get to see him in like a flashback talking about how the girls died. And it doesn't really seem like they didn't see him kill the girls. He's holding their bodies and crying when they find him, and which doesn't really strike me as something like a cold-blooded murderer would do. But also I think that there is some type of challenge that he has mentally. I don't know if it's just because of like the state he was in when the people found him like holding the dead girls' bodies, because obviously that's quite a thing to experience if he didn't do it. And even if he did, I guess it's still quite a thing to experience. But he had a hard time like remembering where he got his lunch, which not sure why they asked him that, but okay. So yeah, I'm not really convinced yet that he's done it, but I'm assuming that that's the point of this book in general. We also get a lot of backstory about a mouse that lived with one of the people that was on death row and like waiting to die. And I think he's like, that's happened already. I think he's like gone to the electric chair. And that was sad, like watching him basically be like, you know, take care of my mouse. Mr. Jingles is his name. And I really like the mouse. It's very cute. I was a little bit like, okay, why are we getting so much story about this mouse? Like, I don't really need all this. But I have to say, like, I want to protect that mouse at all costs. And I'm really worried about what's going to happen to it next, just based off of how this installment ended. But we'll get there when we get there. I have to wait a whole week to read that, which is good. I wanted to feel that feeling of like, what's going to happen? You can't know until the installment is published next week, even though it's, you know, clearly is already published and exists here and I could read it. I like that I'm getting to experience this like the people that initially read this. One criticism I have is that there is a lot, I mean a lot of talk about Paul's urinary infection. They must have mentioned it. So this first installment was like 70 pages long. They must have mentioned it like 30 times, maybe even 35, and it to come up like on half the pages that were in this installment. It was so much, because sometimes it would be as little as like, I decided to stand up because I thought it would make my nether regions more comfortable. Like something as small as that to actually talking about the act of urinating and how much it burns. And also he uses like the same analogy every time, like that he's peeing hot oil or that he's pouring it down himself and like all this. Oh my gosh, it's so much. But I'll see you next week, my time, to talk about the second installment of the book. Okay, so I have finished the second installment of The Green Mile. It's a week later since, actually I think it's exactly a week later since I last updated you. So the second installment was called The Mouse on the Mile. And I didn't like it quite as much as the first one, just because we went back and did a lot of like the backstory leading up to where the first installment starts, and I didn't really care about that. I didn't feel like the first installment made me want to learn about what led us to this moment, but instead made me want to learn what happened next. And so I felt like that kind of, once I realized that that was what the whole installment was going to be, I was like, oh, this kind of stinks, which is a weird thing that I didn't expect to get from reading a book this way. But it's funny when you know, like, you only are going to be reading a little bit from a book, then when you realize like, oh, that's what it's about and it's not something you're excited about, you're kind of like, oh, this stinks. I'm gonna have to wait like a whole nother week for anything else to happen. But that being said, it was like kind of nice to understand the characters a little bit better, I guess, and like how things work in the prison and like all that, I guess, was good. I'm glad like I have the information now. I just didn't want to go through the process of getting it. So we get an odd amount of mouse backstory, which we're told is going to play a bigger role later, but like, I don't know, maybe it will. I like, on one hand, I kind of like reading about the mouse because he sounds really cute and I used to have mice as pets, so I'm on board and like I can totally picture everything that they are talking about. But it's also like a mouse in a story about a guy that's like possibly going to have his life taken from him, and I don't even know if he's guilty or not, and I feel like he's not. One great thing about going back to before the first installment was happening was that Paul, the guard, the perspective that we have throughout the book, is not talking, or he wasn't talking as much about his urinary infection because it hadn't started yet. So that was great. Also, I do kind of like how Paul's telling the story because it's basically him writing it from being in an old folks home in the future, like after all of this has happened. And he takes a moment at the beginning of the installment to kind of reacquaint us with where we're at, who the people are there, which is cool because he knew, obviously, that people would be reading this. He as in Stephen King, not he as in Paul. Stephen King knew that people would be reading this in installments. Like that's how it was being published. So he made sure that like people remembered what was going on in the previous installment, which reminded me of like reading a book series, especially as a kid, where like you start the next book in the series and they have to do like a little recap, but they have to try to be like creative about it. Or I guess they don't have to be, but usually they are. And so that was kind of nice. I appreciated that, especially because I did kind of struggle with the characters the first time. I'm getting more used to them through this installment. There are still a few names that I mix up, especially because like everybody has a nickname. Also, I learned a new word in this installment, which was parricide, which is the act of murdering one's parents. Did not know there was a word for that. Now I do. Oh, we got to hear all about how the executions work. Got to see basically a walkthrough of what an execution would be. So they kind of like practice before it's time for an execution, which seems grim. They don't use, when they first started talking about it, I thought they were saying they use like the actual prisoner, and like how awful would it be to do rehearsals for your own death? But they don't do it with them, so at least there's that, I guess. And then in this installment there was actually the full execution of somebody, and that was tough to read. Percy, I hate Percy. I can't remember if I talked about him in the first installment, but if I did, I probably said I hate him, and I hate him more now. He's so frustrating, and he represents everything that I hate about people like him. Like he basically just has like connections to like the governor's office or something like that, so he can work anywhere he wants to in the state, and Paul can't really like discipline him like he should be able to at some points, even when he treats the prisoners absolutely terribly. And honestly, like he annoys me so much. And like he could have worked anywhere. Like a lot of the people that are working here not really by choice, but because like this is the industry that they got into, like this is the type of work they got into, and this is set during the Great Depression, so they can't really complain about their job. They just need to keep it and like keep going through this depression so that hopefully, you know, that they can survive it, they can have money to survive it, and then maybe at the end they can get out and do something else. But Percy can actually have his choice of a job, and he chooses to be in the prison where they execute people, which is messed up. But yes, that is installment 2. I will talk to you again after installment 3. So I have finished the 3rd installment of this book, and I took quite some time to do it. I finished it on Friday, and considering Wednesday is the day when like a new installment opens up to me, that is quite a while for like 60 to 70 pages of a book. And in fact, it is now Wednesday again, so the 4th installment I'll be starting today, but I just didn't want to talk about this. Like I didn't want to talk about the 3rd installment, but I need to before I get started on the 4th one, so here I am. So I have a lot of complaints about the 3rd installment. Like already the first 2 installments I wasn't super enjoying. I was curious to find out what happens, like what will happen, and I still am, but it's just every installment I'm just kind of like, I don't know. So one of my problems with it is that I just feel like in general this book could be better about building suspense for moments, or at least like not telling us what's going to happen beforehand. But I feel like in the first 2 installments we heard a lot about like how crazy Wild Bill would be, and we even found out that he nearly killed Dean before actually seeing that scene in this installment. And it was just one of those things that like by the time it actually happened I didn't really care as much anymore. I think that Stephen King was trying to write in the first 2 installments things that would get us excited to read the future installments. But instead it just made it not as good when I got to this installment, because I'd already heard about it and I knew that nothing, like that Dean wasn't going to die. So I think that that could have been done better. Another thing which has been like slowly getting to me, but it really built up in this installment, is just how John Coffey is talked about in general. Like already mostly he's just been described as being really big and very black. Those are really the only descriptors that we've gotten for him physically, and then also we know that he's very quiet and he cries often. But it continues that in this installment. Like every time they go anywhere near him, the narrator talks about like how big he is, how black he is, and now there's like this mystical element involved as well with him like being able to heal people, and it feels like it's fitting into this very specific stereotype, And it's also, I don't know, the way he's written about is very like dehumanizing. He doesn't feel like a human like the other characters in the book do. And I also kind of felt that way about the Native American character that was in this book as well, which I don't even think I've talked about him. They called him Chief, but he was the first one that was executed in this book. And even him, I felt like there was a little bit of that dehumanizing descriptors and everything, and he very much seemed like a stereotype of Native Americans, so that's unfortunate. However, this did make me cry. The end of this installment with Mr. Jingles, the mouse, being stomped on by Percy. I mean, I didn't think I could hate Percy any more than I did. And I was pretty sure that this is what was going to happen. I mean, not the exact way that it was going to happen, but I was pretty sure that Percy was going to kill Mr. Jingles at some point. But man, it was rough. Like, I owned mice growing up, so reading that section, I hated it. I hated it. Anyways, on to installment 4. All right, another installment done. I didn't take quite so long to read this one. Also, I usually take notes while I'm reading these sections so that I can remember exactly what I want to talk about when I record like the little wrap up of that section and my thoughts and everything. But I didn't do that this time. I think I was so much in that frame of mind of like, ugh, just gotta get this done. Like, I don't want to be reading this anymore. And because I didn't really enjoy the last installment, that I was just kind of like head down, like, let's get through this. But I actually have a bit of a more positive reaction for this 4th installment. So it was still really hard to read, and there was still a portion of it that like, ugh. Oh wait, I can say what it's, I keep forgetting this is like a spoilers video. So I knew his execution was going to be in this book. It was pretty clear, and I hated knowing that because it was so clear to me that Stephen King was like making his character more likable and giving him, I don't know, this like almost happy-go-lucky for being somebody that's on death row. Like, he was a very positive person and so nice. And while I think that he was a little bit, I don't know, they could have given him more, fleshed out his character a bit more than he did. I don't know why I keep saying they, like multiple people wrote this. And I think that he could have fleshed out a lot of the secondary characters more than he did. But like, it still super got to me, and I struggled. And obviously, like, they've been hinting at the execution like going really wrong or being really bad, and like because Percy was going to be out front for it and everything, and it was just every bit as awful as the anticipation leading up to it and being told over and over again that it was going to be awful. Like, I hated that, and then I hated when I was actually reading it. But I will say it did live up to what King was like dropping hints about, I guess. Oh my gosh, Percy better get like something coming to him. I'm sure he will. Like, he has to, just because of how much of a setup he's getting for like how terrible of a character he is. I feel like King has got to do something that makes the reader feel a little bit better about how much of a terrible person he's been this whole time. Also, so happy about Mr. Jingles being okay. Ugh, it's so cute that like he hung out with John Coffey during the execution. Like, I'm glad that the mouse is still alive, but then also the mouse had to basically like say goodbye to Dell, which was really sad and hard to read. All of it was hard to read. But then the ending of this installment where what's his name, Paul, is like, yeah, I don't think that John Coffey is guilty. Like, I think he's innocent and I can prove it. And he's like something about his shoe. And I'm like, what in the world? Because there was some moment earlier in the installment that was about a shoe. And I was like, am I supposed to know what that means? And then I just decided, nope. And then later, like, that's how the installment ends, is about a shoe again. And I was like, so should I though? Like, should I have been able to piece this together? And part of me feels like I should, but I'll just wait until the next installment and he can explain it to me. And yeah, now they've got this plan to take John Coffey to the warden's wife. I can't remember what his like position in the prison system is considered, but basically Paul's boss, who is much older, and his wife is really struggling with, I think, brain cancer, some type of cancer. But since John Coffey can heal people, they're talking, like the guards are kind of talking, with the exception of Percy, obviously, the guards are kind of talking about taking John Coffey out of the prison and healing her, and then taking him back to the prison. And everybody's like, what are you doing? Like, that sounds like a terrible idea. Like, he's still a murderer after all. And then that's when he's like, I don't think that he's guilty. Anyways, I will see you next week with installment number 5. Okay, so installment 5 of The Green Mile. I have such conflicting feelings about this book. Like, on one hand, well, now I'm like in the point where I do want to find out what happens and everything. But on the other hand, there are things that it has in it that just are really frustrating, which I think comes from reading older books in general. And not that all older books suffer from this. I think there are books that are written during, or were written during, this time period that don't suffer from these same things, but it's like a risky run when reading those books. Oh, for example, Paul, the protagonist, he compares writing like sad memories at one point to sexual assault, which, like, weird thing to do. And he doesn't even like explain why. Like, I reread that section several times trying to understand what he was trying to say, and I honestly have no idea. So yeah, things like that where you're like, what? But anyways, I have to say I'm getting pretty sick of the beginning portions of each of the installments. We're in like where Paul is now before we do the flashback to like the real story of the book. And so Paul being in this like nursing home environment, it's just, I find it pretty boring, and it's I guess getting slightly more interesting now. And I know that there's going to be like some connection at the end of this where it's like, oh, that's why we're hearing like both sides of this. Well, at least I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some connection. There better be, honestly. But as for now, like, because like we know that Paul's doing some, like he walks somewhere every morning and does something, so you know that it's gonna have some connection to like what his story was in here. But like, it's so boring. Oh, something that I found really frustrating. Okay, so the end of installment 4 was like, I don't think that John Coffey did it, and the reason I know is because of my shoe or something. And I was like, what did I miss? Like, what? I was trying to think so hard about like what shoe thing did I miss in this? And I have to say, now that we know what he meant by that, which was, so when the people found John Coffey with the 2 girls that had like just been killed, he had a little package lunch that had some food in it tied up, and I guess there were sausages in it, or there typically were sausages in it, but they were saying like, oh, he probably threw those sausages at the dog of the family that the 2 girls were in, and like where they came from, to like distract the dog so that he could then kill the dog and then take the girls. But his little lunch thing was all tied up, and John Coffey can't tie shoelaces. And maybe, did he ever say that John Coffey couldn't tie his shoes? Because I don't believe that he did. And if he had, then I think that would have been like a great moment where it's like you could technically figure out that line of thinking. Like, he can't tie his shoes, the bag was tied up, so he couldn't have taken the sausages out and then retied the bag. But I don't think that they ever mentioned that, which means that you couldn't have guessed it because you didn't know that John Coffey couldn't tie anything, which is annoying because I like when books add those things, and that seems like a missed opportunity. But maybe I just missed it. It's totally possible. Please let me know if I did and like that was in the book. Oh, also they continually say like the meanest things about John Coffey. Like, they keep calling him an idiot, dummy, stupid, slow,
like vacant-eyed, and like it's just like, you don't know this guy. I know that they work with him like being in the prison, but he's like quiet all the time. Like, you don't know that he's like not smart. And he does have these like memory problems. Like, he can't remember things that happened just before, which is like a whole factor in him being convicted of these murders. But like, I don't know, you don't need to like just relentlessly say these things about him, relentlessly call him stupid. That seems just not helpful. It's just like, it's weird. It's weird how much focus is put on just like the same three aspects of John Coffey over and over and over and over and over again without showing it. It's like purely telling you. And I'm sick of it. Anyways, that's how I'm feeling right now. I am so excited that it's just one installment and then this is done. It feels so weird to be reading a book like this for as long as I have. And I'm ready to be done with it. But yeah, I will let you know my full thoughts soon. So I've officially finished The Green Mile. 6 weeks later, I'm done with it. It's been so weird to read a book like over that span of time. That just seems like so long. And I'm so happy to be done with it. I have to say, my least favorite Stephen King, now it is only my 5th of his, but I didn't like, and I think that a large part of it was probably just Stephen King writing in a different medium than he was used to, in that like he was writing in installments and needing to kind of add these like catch-ups in the beginning of each installment so that when you're reading as intended, then you remember like, oh, that's right, that's what's happening. But that did get kind of tedious to read, and while it was nice, I think like the first time picking it back up, like reading the second installment, it was nice to be like, oh, that's right, that's what's going on. For like the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, didn't really need like the general synopsis of the story again. What I did need was like information that was in installment 1 that hadn't been in another installment, but was important and pertained to, like, for example, you hear about John Coffey's story. Like, you hear about him being found with these 2 dead girls, and that's in installment 1, I think. And then it doesn't really become like super relevant again until like maybe 4, 5, 6. And by then it's been so long since installment 1. So yeah, it's just, I still found a lot of struggles through that aspect of it. But if I were to read these like all back to back, I already found it tedious to read the first part of every installment and to be like back in the nursing home and hearing that side of the story, because it just felt so repetitive to me. And if I had just been reading, like my main focus being this book, just reading the book until I'm done, like I do with other books, then I think that I would have really struggled in those parts. But man, even just like having those, I didn't even want to start installments because I was like, oh, I'm just gonna be like back with Paul in the nursing home, and like I'm gonna have to read through that before I can get to like the actual story again. But as far as I guess I should talk like specifically about installment 6 and not just like my overall feelings. But installment 6, it just feels like such a cop-out to be like, I don't know, John Coffey he feels like he is like this creation of a person that's only there to help and like fix other people's lives. He suffers his whole life, and then it's just so convenient that he just actually wants to die. Like, it just all seems so convenient. Here's this magical person. All he wants to do in life is to help other people, and also he's totally cool with dying. It all seems so easy on like the people in it. Oh, there's no way to get him out of jail? Well, luckily he doesn't care and he wants to die anyway. Also, there was this part in chapter 7 that reminded me of another book that I recently read, Washington Black, by Edugyan. There was this section in it that was talking about how like the white people in the story were looking at slavery and like owning slaves as a way that could keep them out of heaven, and not as in regards to the actual lives, like this torture that they're putting real human beings through. They're not thinking about that. They're thinking about it in terms of like their own ability to like get into heaven. Like it's about them still, even then. When they're trying to like morally think about it in the right way, it's still like selfish. And one of the people in this story I think it's Brutal. Yeah, Brutal. He says, I've done a few things in my life that I'm not proud of, but this is the first time I ever felt really actually in danger of hell. And I thought that it was kind of funny that he was still thinking about it in terms of himself. And that was about like, you know, executing John Coffey when he didn't do anything. And I do wonder like how long John Coffey lived for, because we know that Paul lived longer than he should have because of being healed by him, and the mouse lives like way longer. So I do wonder if like John Coffey is actually like hundreds of years old or something, which I do think would have been a cool thing to hear about, but because he just like forgets so much in his life, like he forgets things so easily, so that could have been like a really interesting thing to learn, like things about his past. And yet he's a character that just forgets things. It just seems like everything is like so conveniently written about him as a way to make this story about him, but not about him at all. Oh, and then the reveal of it being the mouse that Paul was feeding that whole time. That did catch me by surprise. Did not expect that. I knew that there was going to be like some connection in like the future to what was happening in the past, because otherwise, like, what's the point? So I thought that it was like a decent reveal. I don't know. I guess I was really hoping for something different out of this, like because I wasn't really feeling it for like this whole story, and I thought that maybe there would be some type of redemption towards the end of it. But I just don't think that there was. Like, I think that maybe this book should have been like 4 installments instead of 6, because it's a lot. Or at least just like shorter in general. But I mean, part of me, like, I'm glad that I've read it, but mostly because now I can see the movie, which is supposed to be like really great and a classic. So I'm looking forward to that aspect of it. I mean, I'm not super looking forward to it because it turns out it's a 3-hour movie. And I don't really want to watch a 3-hour movie right now, but I'm going to, because I'd like to include in this video my thoughts on the movie. I'm really hoping that that turns it around. Also, didn't realize it was a Tom Hanks movie. So that does increase my excitement a little bit. I love Tom Hanks. But I guess it's movie time now, so I'll let you know what I thought about that. So I read the book in installments, and then I watched the movie in installments today. I was like a little bit of a mess through that movie. Oh, I'm such like a baby when it comes to anything. Yeah, and it took me a while to collect myself afterwards. It took like pizza, ice cream, half a gin and tonic, and I think now I'm ready to talk about, I don't know my feelings. The movie was better than the book, I think, personally. I think that a lot of that goes into the acting behind it. Like, everybody in it just did phenomenal jobs. But like seeing John Coffey and like the acting behind it, like portraying that character, I think did a lot more than a lot of what was written in the book, because there wasn't really enough about John Coffey. But like, you can see all the fillers and like the emotions and the facial expressions that I felt like I didn't really get a feel for in the book itself. But that being said, I think still overall as a story, I'm not super sold. Like, I still have a lot of the same complaints that I had about the book. Some of them were alleviated. Like, for example, the foreshadowing was really toned down and made more subtle in the movie, which was a great choice. I also think that the addition of having John Coffey, like, watching the movie, he wanted to watch a movie before he died, and having that be the connecting point at the beginning, that was a really nice thing to add to it. I would recommend, if for some reason you watch this entire video and you have not read the book or watched the movie and you're turning to this for advice on if you should do either, is it bad to say, like, don't do either? No, I guess maybe the movie, I guess watch the movie. You really don't need to read the book. Like, you really don't. But if I wasn't making this video, I think it would have taken me a lot longer to watch that movie, because I did not want to do it and kind of just pushed myself through it in order to be able to film this last clip and like finish this video, because I don't want to be in the story anymore. I don't want to be reading it, watching it, talking about it, or anything anymore. It doesn't matter. None of this matters. In the end, nothing matters. And this is just the mental state that I've been in for hours. Ugh. So anyways, what am I trying to say? If you have suggestions for other books to do this for, please let me know. If you're curious to continue watching my TBR Tackle journey, then I did just post a video last week on The Memory Police, which was the second book, my February book for the TBR Tackle. So feel free to go watch that. There's no spoilers for the book. This, I think, will be the only time where I'll do like a full spoilers version of the video, just because I'd kind of been planning it for this book anyways. And besides that, yeah, I think that that's everything. Ooh, I know what you can comment. If you're a big Stephen King fan, or even just like a moderate one, could you please let me know in the comments what your favorite book by him is, and then also what your least favorite book is? Because for me, I think The Green Mile would be my least favorite for him. My favorite? Maybe The Shining. I did really enjoy The Shining, but I also like The Stand, but also it was very long, like a bit too long for the story. I don't know. All I know is The Green Mile was my least favorite, but maybe let me know that as well. And with that, I think that this mess of a video is over. I'm not looking forward to editing this. This is going to be a nightmare to edit through because I already know I've been inarticulate in several check-ins, particularly this one. So cheers to you, editing Sarah. Good luck. Anyways, with that brings this video to a close. I hope that you did enjoy it, and if nothing else, then maybe you enjoyed and like laughed at my experience through this. If you decided to read alongside me through this video and also didn't like it, I'm sorry that I dragged you into this experience with me, but hopefully there was some type of solace here. Anyways, yeah, that's it. So I'll see you next week for my next video. Okay, bye.